The postman dropped a plain envelope on my doorstep and said, "Someone left this for you," before he turned away. Longing tightened my hands around the waxed flap as if the paper itself might answer what no one had said for years. I opened the envelope on the threshold while the lane smelled of damp hay and cow breath. The single folded page inside had handwriting I could name by feel. That recognition landed like a small, precise pain and pushed me forward. I kept my voice level. "Did you see who left it?" I asked the postman. He shook his head and tucked his cap lower. My chest felt hollow and sharp at once, longing steering me toward action instead of retreat. I folded the page against my palm and walked back into the kitchen to sit at the table where I had written those same shapes over and over. Lines never mailed but always addressed. The kitchen light hummed above the table. I set the envelope down and smoothed the page flat like I meant to read every letter in it as proof. I read the first line aloud to myself. "Evelyn," it said in that low, deliberate slant. The name made the air in the room narrower. I could taste metal at the back of my mouth. The page carried no more than a sentence, and a tiny inked mark in the corner I recognized from a page I once saw folded into a Dryan's coat. The paper was damp at one edge. Maggie was at my back before I could fold the page again. "You look like you swallowed a storm," she said, and she took the chair opposite mine without asking. I felt the need to explain and also the need to be silent. Longing moved me toward questions. The returned page turned those questions into a demand. I laid the paper on the table between us. "Where did it come from?" Maggie, lifting the page with 2 fingers as if it might break. Her breath smelled faintly of peppermint. "Show me the postmark." I turned the paper so she could see the faint ink at the corner. The stamp was smudged but showed a town name I had feared and hoped to hear. Fenwick. Maggie's mouth tightened. "Fenwick isn't anywhere near us, Evie. People don't send letters from there by mistake." Her voice sharpened into a plan. She set the page back down. "We go to the post office. We ask questions. You can't sit on this and pretend it's nothing." Her hand stayed flat on the table. Her conviction pulled me toward the door. I dressed quickly, wool cardigan over a blouse, boots that kept gravel out, satchel slung across my shoulder. I folded the returned page and tucked it into the satchel where my fountain pen lived. The pen has a small dent near the nib. I had used it for every unsent letter. Longing had kept my letters secret, but when a page returns, longing becomes an engine, not a hush. At the post office the light was bright and paper scented. The postmaster, Mr. Hale, recognized me and squinted at the page. I held it out so he could see the smudge. "I handed this to a man the other week," he said after a pause. "A man with a heavy coat. Hands that looked like they worked." He me where the lane to Fenwick was. I pointed him toward the main road. He thanked me and left. His words were small facts, but each fact shifted my center. "Did he say his name?" I asked. Maggie leaned forward until her shawl made a soft scraping sound as she rested her elbows on the counter. Mr. Hale shook his head. "No name. Coat had a patch cuff." Sounded like he had a quiet way of talking. If any letters ever find their way back to people who waited." The last line landed like a fist. I felt suspicion tighten, suspicion that Ed Ryan had been in town and that his presence had threads I could not yet see. We left the post office with the postmark rubbed into the memory of my palm. Villagers noticed us at the square. "Mrs. Grafton stopped sweeping and said, "Evelyn, dear, did you hear? I saw a man down by the river last week, leaning on the lamp like he didn't want to be seen." Her voice threaded gossip and concern. Neighbors' faces turned toward us with small, practical questions. Whispers travel a village like seed on the wind. They take root and grow explanations. Maggie reached for my arm. "They say he keeps dangerous company," she said in the low voice she uses when she wants to protect rather than alarm. Her eyes found mine. She knew the rumors about Adrian, him wrapped in obligations he refused to explain. I felt fear shift through me. Doubt about what I wanted from him into a concern that his return might not only reopen me but also expose me to harm. "Then we go to the riverbank," I said. The decision steadied my hands. Maggie blinked at me. "You're not going alone," she said. I hoisted my satchel with the page inside and we walked out, past the market stalls and the pub with its dented sign, toward the lamplight that marks the lane by the river. The lane was colder at night. My boots left shallow prints in the hard soil. We kept toward the lamp where the river turned, the light pooling on the path. I could hear water talking over stone. The lamp cast a thin pool, and within that pool a figure slid out from the dark and walked toward us with the slow certainty of someone who knows paths by habit. He stepped into the light and stopped a pace away. I recognized the cut of his coat, the repaired cuff, the dull signet ring. For a moment I could not speak. He did not either. Adrian held out a damp, folded page and let it fall into my hand. His fingers did not linger. The paper bore the same small mark as the page from the envelope. The dampness smelled of river water and rain. Adrian, I said, and my voice broke on his name. He looked at me with the distance he kept even in the quietest rooms. You shouldn't be here, he said without moving his mouth enough to make it sound like blame. The sentence was both warning and plea. The river hissed nearby. Maggie behind me swallowed audibly. Adrian Corvo, she said. Her name for him carried the village's mixture of fear and respect. He kept his hand tucked into his coat and did not answer her. He stepped back into shadow with the same economy he had always kept, minimal speech, maximal withdrawal. Then he left, walking down the path toward the main road as if he belonged to the motion of leaving. My fingers clenched around the returned page. The crease matched the fold I remembered from a page he'd once kept in his inner pocket. Longing flipped into a new motion, resolve edged with alarm. I turned the paper over. There were 3 words scrawled there in a hand I had traced by candlelight. Do not follow. The ink was smudged where rain had brushed it. The page added danger to hope. Maggie put a hand on my shoulder. He gave it back to you in person, because he couldn't risk a letter getting lost, she said. But Evie, he told you not to follow. That means something else is moving him. Her voice was urgent but low. We walked back to her shed by the allotments where she keeps a kettle and an extra lantern. Inside the shed the lamp threw small yellow circles on the wooden walls. We spread the page on the bench and examined the ink and the crease. The crease matched a fold Adrian used when he kept pages in his coat. 1 vertical fold, 2 horizontal folds. I traced it with a fingertip until my fingertip tingled. Why give this back at all? I asked. Why risk it? My questions were short, sharp. They filled the gaps where explanations should have been. Maggie tapped the table. Maybe he wanted you to know he's near. Maybe he wanted to warn you without speaking to anyone else. Maybe he couldn't bear to leave you ignorant. She paused as she considered each option out loud. Her voice shifted from speculation to command as she drew breath. We go to Fenwick, Evelyn. We find out who gave him the page. If he's tangled with something dangerous, we need to see the ropes. Her decision moved beyond protecting my feelings. It aimed to remove threat. I slept badly that night in the little bed at my cottage, the returned page folded into my satchel at the foot of the bed. I rose before dawn and packed bread, a flask of tea, and my pen. The pen has a dent and an ink blot at the end where I pressed too hard when I was 14. The dent is a memory as useful as any picture. Longing was still there, an ache and a directive at once, but it now shared space with a tightening I could not ignore. On the road to Fenwick, Maggie talked without stopping. She practical questions about where I'd last seen Adrian, about who might know him, about whether I'd ever seen him meet with people who carried weapons. I answered in short lines. I saw him at the inn once with 2 men in plain coats. I said he left before breakfast. Her questions collected details like pebbles. Each pebble built a pathway. We reached Fenwick by mid-morning. The town square smelled of wet stone and horse sweat. Maggie spoke to the innkeeper first, and then to the man who runs the blacksmith. People in Fenwick were wary of strangers. A small woman with a handkerchief at her throat told us she had seen a man fitting Adrian's coat heading for a warehouse by the river on a night when rain made the yard a mud bath. She spat on the ground as if to clear the memory of him. We found the warehouse shut and its windows high. A padlock hung on a chain and the yard looked like it had not been used in months. Maggie crouched and ran a hand over the floor where the mud had dried into ridges. Someone came through here recently, left boot prints like a heavy man with work boots, she said. Her eyes were small, precise. She looked up at me with a quick, practical question. Do you want to go in? I counted my breaths and felt the weight of action. My answer was a nod. Maggie moved like a woman who knows how to bend metal. She found a side gate that had been left loose and pushed it open without a sound. We slipped inside and saw the dark space of the warehouse. The floor smelled of oil. Stacked crates sat in one corner and a rope hung from a beam. There were marks on the floor where heavy boots had scuffed the wood. An unexpected sound made both of us freeze, a soft scrape like paper against wood. From the far corner a shadow moved and a damp page fluttered to the floor. We both stepped toward it. My breath hitched into a quick, sharp pattern. Fear moving in to replace the earlier resolve. I picked the page up and found a folded corner with the same inked mark and a time scrawled in the margin. 2 nights ago, the paper made the warehouse more immediate. It made threat physical. Someone cleared their throat near the doorway. A man in a passerby coat stood there with his hands half lifted to show he carried no weapon. "You should not be poking around," he said. His voice was even. "I can tell you to leave Fenwick." Maggie did not step back. She set her jaw and said, "We ask questions. We leave when satisfied." They traded short sentences, 3 lines snapping back and forth about who had the right to be in town and why. The passerby named himself as a local foreman who had found items missing from the yard and was watching for thieves. His story fit, but his eyes kept flicking to the rope and the stacked crates. I watched his hands. He tapped a rhythm on his thigh with a nail that had a chipped edge. Every small movement carried meaning. I felt suspicion and then a twist toward a sharper fear. This man might be the sort who notices things and removes them. We left the warehouse with the new page folded into my sleeve. The town held its breath as we walked back to the road. Fenwick's innkeeper watched from his doorway and spat a line about dangerous men who keep tidy faces. The return trip felt heavier. Each person we had spoken to added a layer of explanation I had not had before. None of those explanations made a Dryan stay. At dusk we returned to the riverbank in our own village to look for more evidence. The lamplight collected on the wet stones. There were footprints at the edge of the water and a scrap of fabric snagged on a reed. I picked up the scrap and recognized the weave of a coat I had once held in my hands. My fingers closed around it like a key finding a lock. A shadow moved along the opposite bank. I could not see the face at first. Then he stepped into the light and I saw Adrian's profile for only a second before he turned away. He left a single page tucked under a rock on my side of the bank. I walked to it with my boots cold and my heart beating a steady, shallow rhythm. I picked up the page. It carried a quick line. "I am sorry for leaving without answer. I had to go for other reasons. Meet me at dawn if you must. Do not bring anyone else." The line contained apology and command at once. Dawn found me on the lane outside my cottage. I had not slept much. I packed the returned page into my satchel and left the rest of my letters where they were. Maggie insisted on coming with me to the river, but I refused gently. "No, Maggie, if he asked me not to bring anyone, then I go alone. This is between him and me." My voice was steady though my hands shook. I could not be certain whether my steadiness came from fear or a hardening of purpose. I walked toward the lamp alone with the satchel at my side. The river smelled of cold and silt. The lamp threw a small circle of light. Adrian was already there looking out over the water. He did not turn when I approached. He kept his coat buttoned up as if keep the river and the air outside him. He held a single page folded in his hand. "You came," he said without surprise. He did not say my name. I stepped into the light and set my satchel down. I placed the returned page on the bench beside his hand. "Why did you leave?" I asked directly. The question landed like a stone. He answered with another action. He put his hand flat on the bench and folded the page so the mark was visible. "I left because there were things I could not explain without putting you in danger," he said. His voice stayed low and careful. He counted his words like a man who wants to balance truth and safety. "I thought distance would protect you. I was wrong if it hurt you." His hands trembled for a single beat, then stilled. The admission shifted something inside me from suspicion to a brittle kind of understanding. "You mean not to follow you by leaving that line?" I said. "Why return a page at all?" He looked at his hands as if they were foreign objects in that light. "Because I needed you to know I had not forgotten. Because there are people I owe things to and promises I keep that don't allow explanations." The last words without volunteering names. The silence that followed held threat in its shape. I wanted to ask who he kept promises to. Instead I asked, "Are you safe here?" The question sounded small, practical. He did not answer with words. He tapped his knuckles against the wood in the rhythm I knew from when he paced at night thinking. That small, repeated sound told me more than any speech. Danger had the texture of his motion. A rustling along the bank made us both look up. A boat scraped against the far pier, a dull sound swallowed by the river. Adrian's hand closed around the page in his palm. He stood and moved a half-step between me and the water like someone placing his body as a barrier. "You should go back," he said. His voice had a clarity I had not heard before. I stepped closer to him. "I will not be shoved away again," I said. My words were deliberately measured. I wanted them to be actions that could be held on to. He blinked and, for the first time since he had left, the map of his face changed, the tension eased by a fraction, the jaw softened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded page with the same inked mark. He put it into my hand. "Read it when you can look straight at the road out of here," he said. "If you follow me, you might not find the person you remember. If you stay, you might find me missing. I am telling you this because you asked for truth, not safety." His words collided with the river noise and settled there. I unfolded the page. It contained a single instruction and a name of a place where he had once promised to meet me years ago. The name was a small point of light in the paper. I folded it back and put it into my satchel. "Why did you come back to leave a page?" I asked again. He looked at the river and then at the lamplight on my face. "Because there is a chance I can make it right," he said. The words held both hope and the awareness of impossibility. He gave me a look I remembered. The same steady, contained look from our first summer on the lane, when he fixed my satchel with a piece of twine. For a moment the past was concrete. His rough hands on twine, the smell of his coat after rain, the way he read a page aloud to me once until the words stuck in my head. I folded the returned page into my satchel with my pen on top. I felt the shift in myself. Longing had led me here. Now resolve mixed with a cautious hope. I told him, "I will go to the town on the postmark. I will not follow your orders if they ask me to disappear, but I will come with my eyes open." He nodded once and then stepped back into the dark without asking me to promise anything else. As I walked back up the lane toward home, the lamp shrank behind me. My feet made a small, regular sound on the dirt. Dawn would find me packing for a journey. The returned page sat like a promise folded into my satchel and a knot in my breath. By the time I reached the cottage, Maggie was waiting with a thermos and 2 loaves of bread. She held the thermos out without a question and looked at me with practical eyes. "Did you speak to him?" she asked. I handed her the page that had come back to me. "He warned me not to follow and then told me where to go," I said. I did not pretend I had answers. Maggie nodded and put the page into her own pocket as if it were a tool. We made a plan by the kitchen table with short sentences and lists. We wrote down the town name, the inn's name Adrian had mentioned, and the hour we would leave. Maggie insisted on bringing someone she trusted from the next village as a precaution. I did not refuse. I had learned that choices are small actions strung together. We agreed to move at first light. The chapter ended with the concrete act of locking my cottage door and slinging the satchel over my shoulder. I stepped out into the lane and shut the door behind me. The returned page lay folded against my forearm as if it were a map I could feel. I walked toward the cart where Maggie's companion waited and set my foot in the stirrup, deciding then to follow the clue printed faintly on that smudged postmark. Emotion root longing emotion shifts. Longing suspicion resolve, suspicion fear cautious hope. I slammed the post office door and held the damp envelope up so the clerk could not ignore it. Suspicion tightened my hands around the waxed flap as the bell over the door clattered. "Someone delivered this to my doorstep," I said, voice flat with something closer to accusation than surprise. The clerk glanced from the stamp to my face and said, "Open it then." That single, sharp order made the room small and practical. The conflict was immediate. Someone had taken my letters and returned a page instead of an answer. I needed to know if my words had been read or used. "I am Evelyn Hart. I live in the lane behind the mill and run the little patch of field by the old stone hedgerow. I keep my days counted by chores. The morning cow, the ledger of seeds, the fountain pen tucked in my worn leather satchel. I keep my nights counted by letters written and folded, letters I never posted. The returned page on my doorstep hours ago changed the ledger and the night. The postman had left it where he usually put parcels. That detail matters because it meant the person who returned the page had access to where I kept things. I could not accept that the single scrap was a mistake. The clerk, a young man with flour on his sleeves, set the envelope on the counter and slid a paper knife toward me. I sliced the flap. A torn, damp page folded twice lay inside. Rain had smudged ink along its edges. My stomach tightened. Suspicion shifted into a hard decision. I told the clerk, "Keep the envelope, note the postmark for me." He hesitated and then wrote it down. Actions mattered. Names mattered. The postmark read Millbridge Sorting, the same little office 2 villages over where Adrian's letters sometimes arrived when he left town. I left the post office with the torn page folded against my palm. The sun struck the lane in a way that made the mud look clean, but my hands felt covered. I walked to Maggie Cole's house without pausing. Maggie was on her porch, shelling peas into a bowl, and the motion of her hands steadied me the way a visible task steadies a shaking body. I put the page on her table and watched her narrow her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, "where did you get this?" She did not ask softly. Her voice carried the village's right to know and to protect. Maggie took the page and breathed close. She smelled the damp paper and habit she could not hide. She ran a thumb along the crease. "This paper has the ragged edge of that cheap notebook Adrian used to tuck under his jacket," she said, naming him like she always did. She set the scrap beside a pile of my unsent letters spread on the table. My letters had the pressed fold from where I had folded them into the satchel months ago. Maggie compared the edges with careful fingers. She is good at handling objects that hold other people's choices. We compared stamps and paper fibers. I watched the slow tilt of Maggie's mouth when she found what she was looking for. "See here," she said, tapping a faint watermark near the corner. Her finger left a clear spot on the damp page. Adrian carried paper with that pattern. He bought it in a stall at the market years back. Her tone moved from curiosity to a push. She lit a cigarette and watched the smoke curl between the curtains. "We ask around the market. We ask the vendor. We do not sit on this while that man keeps returning my letters like a message in a bottle with the top lopped off." I felt suspicion narrow into purpose. I set my jaw and gathered my letters, folding them the way I always did. I said, "Maggie, tell me everything you remember about that nook." She me the shape of the vendor's stall, the cracked awning, the man who sold paper for less than it should be. Her speech is specific. She remembers things as if saving them from being walked over. I felt determination pull at my shoulders. My waiting turned toward tracking. At the market, the vendor remembered Adrian's coat before he named Adrian. "Coat with a repaired cuff," the man said, rubbing his thumb along the top counter. "I sold him paper once. Black coat, heavy. Paid in coins." He counted twice. He spat and then added, "He was with a dark car once. I saw it in the lane near the mill months ago." Maggie repeated every detail back to the vendor to make sure it matched. The vendor's face tightened when Maggie Adrian's name, "Adrian Corvo," he said, and something like recognition hardened his voice. A market woman interrupted with a louder voice. "He came near the mill last winter," she said, stirring her pot of stew, "a black coat, boots that sloshed in the mud. If it was him, he stayed near the river for an hour. A strange car watched the lane then. Looked like it didn't belong here." Her line started a ripple of heads turning. People who had known Adrian when we'd been young began to feed us small details. A repaired cuff, a watch with a scratch, a mannered way of tapping, a rhythm when nervous. Maggie and I left the market with more questions than answers, but with a clearer trail. The talk in the market turned my waiting into a plan. We took the lane to the old mill, stepping around the puddles where the mud held the marks of heavy tires. I felt the shift from suspicion to unease. My hands clenched the satchel strap. Maggie walked close and squeezed my arm. "Evelyn," she said, "if he's here, he'll not be open to talk. He left for something he thought would keep you safe. Remember that. Ask him the right thing. Do not let him slip past you." Her voice had a sharpened edge I did not like, but it was the language of protection. The mill was a rectangle of shadow and wet wood. We crossed the little footbridge and walked the bank where reeds brushed our boots. There, pinned to a reed by a twist of twine, a damp scrap dangled. I reached for it and the page had the same torn edge as the one from my doorstep. The ink had blood where rain had caught it. My fingers trembled when I touched the paper. An unexpected sound cut across the bank, a footstep on the far side. I turned fast and saw a silhouette pause under the willows. "Evelyn," a voice said. Adrian's voice carries the slight graze of rain and old leather. He stepped forward slowly across the shallow water, his boots making small rings in the current. My throat closed. The river made a thin, constant sound I could not ignore. I had a line ready in my head, a list of questions shaped into a single hard demand. Instead, the words that left me were, "Why did you return it?" Short, sharp, concrete. Adrian looked at the page in my hand and then at my face. "I could not let what I knew put you here," he said, voice low. As if the words cost him "Evelyn," he stopped mid-sentence and the sound of a distant engine split the bank. A dark shape of headlights moved on the lane beyond the mill. His body tightened. I watched the way his hands folded and the old rhythm of his fingers tapping the wood began between his knuckles. I felt fear slip into the space under my ribs. Maggie stepped from behind me like a second decision made aloud. She called, "Adrian Corvo, where were you the night the black car stopped at the lane?" Her voice carried across the water. He flinched. The question itself brought a small flare of sound from the lane. The crunch of gravel. The headlights were closer. Adrian's eyes flicked to the road. "I went where I had to go," he said. He kept his answer short. He kept his hands where I could see them. I walked toward him across the shallow crossing because standing still felt like letting him decide the next move. Every step made a wet slap at my boots. He had the single page folded in his hand now. He reached out and, before I could stop him, placed it in my palm. The line on that page was a single sentence, half smudged but legible. "I left so you would not be dragged in." The paper smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. The knowledge landed with a new weight. His absence had been crafted, not indifferent. The headlights swelled and a car slowed at the lane entrance. Light washed across Adrian's coat and caught the repaired cuff Maggie had remembered. For the first time the coat bore its history in full daylight. Adrian looked at the car and for a second I saw the man who had kept the city patterns folded into his posture. He moved as though he might cross the river toward the car. Instead, he tightened his jaw and said, "I cannot speak long." He took another step back. Maggie set her hands on her hips and shouted, "Adrian, if you care for Evelyn, you tell her why you left. Do not make decisions for her that keep her from knowing." Her words were blunt and raw. Adrian's shoulders dropped the smallest degree and an admission almost slipped free. He reached for the thread of a sentence, an explanation of debts, of obligations he shouldered alone. Then the car's engine cut and a hand flashed on the steering wheel. He folded the sentence away and, in a move too quick to trap with my eyes, he turned and walked into the shadow of the lane. The engine passed. The car did not stop. Headlights winked and were gone. I stood with the single line in my palm and felt a change. My confusion sharpened into an acute understanding that his leaving had been deliberate and costly. I also felt a new thread, anger at being kept safe by omission. My emotions moved again, curiosity into hurt into a hard, careful steadiness. Maggie took my elbow and drew me away from the bank. "We cannot follow a car in the dark without a plan," she said. Her voice held command, and I obeyed because she had already saved me from worse. Back at my kitchen table, we laid the papers in a neat fan. Maggie went through my unsent letters one by one, comparing dates, the rhythm of my pen, the stains where rain had touched the edges. She found an imprint on one letter where a folded page had pressed down across a line of text. "Look," she said, tapping the faint reverse image of a phrase I had written years ago. "Someone put your words next to theirs." They handled both sets of paper. They did not just return one as a gesture. This was a careful choice. The discovery turned the problem from being about neglect into being about intention. We compared handwriting, the pressure of ink, and the nick in the pen stroke I make on capital as. Maggie held a single letter up to her eye and said, "The imprint matches his hand." Adrian's handwriting presses heavier on the downstrokes. Her certainty felt like a tool I could use. The room changed from a place of waiting to a place of search. I felt determination again, but this time it carried the weight of dread. I imagined Adrian making choices I would not like, and the thought of those choices forced my mouth to shape a plan aloud. We returned to the market the next morning with a purpose. find the vendor who sold the paper and ask about any recent customers who might have seemed hurried or watched. The stall man recognized the description and gave us a tighter detail. Last month a dark car sat at the end of the lane all day. The driver had a cheap ring and a slow hand. He about people who wrote to no one. Maggie, he watched the lane. He didn't buy paper. He wanted to know where letters ended up. The vendor's face closed when he said those words. That car wasn't from here, he said. It belongs to men who are careful with what they ask. News like that shifts a private mystery into a public one. We had at least 2 other villagers now who had seen a car. We had a vendor who remembered Adrian by his coat and by the notebook pattern. Each person who repeated the pattern added a small bolt to the chain I used to hold my fear. With each report my emotion moved again, from suspicion into active worry. I began to see the outlines of a choice I had to make. Keep writing silently or press for answers that might draw danger. We agreed to watch the lane in shifts. Maggie organized the rota with a firmness that left no room for argument. She gave me a list and a time slot at dusk when she could not be there. You will not go alone at night to the riverbank, she said. I met her eyes. Maggie, I will not ask for your help if I'm only going to stand and wait. I will go because I need to know what was inside that page. Her hand found mine for a moment and squeezed. Then take me with you. If you insist on knowing, I insist on coming. I felt my resolve not with gratitude. That dusk we moved under willows with flashlights damp from rain. The river air smelled of mud and iron. The reeds skimmed our sleeves. We found more scraps, small pieces clutched in the roots where the water ran slow. One scrap had the faded edge of the same line I had read in my hand earlier. I folded it into my palm like a legal claim and felt my fingers go numb. Footsteps sounded at the far end of the bank. I froze because I had learned to read footsteps. They were deliberate and measured. Adrian was there, leaning against the trunk of an ash tree with his coat collar turned up. He looked tired in a way that naming the tiredness did not explain. He lifted his eyes and said, "Evelyn." He did not move when Maggie stepped forward. She stood with a posture that said she knew how to ask hard questions. "Adrian," she said, "why did you return pages? Was it to keep us safe or to keep yourself free?" That line snapped across the water like a thrown stone. He turned his head away before answering, and then returned with a small phrase. "I thought it would keep you out of certain trouble." His voice held a load of something unspoken. Maggie's mouth formed a word and then replaced it with another. "Adrian, keeping out of trouble isn't the same as telling someone what they need to know." The exchange sharpened the emotional pressure between us. I stepped forward and said, "Adrian, I deserve to hear the truth from you." Not a returned page. The request made a hollow sound in the damp air. He took a breath and began to speak in a hushed, raw line about obligations, payments he had promised to make, favors he had accepted to spare others, and a debt he had chosen to carry alone. His sentences were short and packed with detail. There were men who would follow anyone who showed the letters. If they had proof you were close to me, they would have used it to make you answer for me. I left because I thought the absence would be a shield. The explanation landed and changed the direction of my anger. I felt the second major emotion shift then. The anger folded into a complicated sadness and a sudden clarity. I could see the outline of a life he had stepped into to protect me, but the clarity arrived with a new H. He had decided for me. I wanted to speak, but before I could make a choice, a car pulled up at the lane and a pair of headlights flashed through the trees. Light cut across Adrian's face. He flinched and stepped back. The flash of headlights created the chapter's climax. The car stayed low idling and a shadow moved behind the glass. Adrian's jaw tightened. He reached into his inner pocket and for a moment his fingers rested on a folded page. He drew it out and pushed it into my hand. His hand brushed mine in a motion so quick it felt like a question left unanswered. "I cannot stay," he said. "Not tonight." The engine held a low sound that felt like a closing door. Maggie stepped forward and called his name 3 times in quick succession, each demand sharper than the last. "Adrian. Adrian, you cannot vanish again. Tell her what she needs to know now." The rapid exchange between Maggie and Adrian worked like a lever. He began another sentence about arrangements and threats, but his voice was swallowed by the car's slow rev. A headlight blinked and then the car drove away. The lane returned to the sound of the river and the rustling reeds. I stood on the bank with the single final page in my hand. The paper had one sentence in a torn corner. The sentence said, in ink that had bled from rain and pressure, "I left to keep you invisible. I am sorry I chose silence." The line landed inside me and rearranged the questions I'd been carrying. It did not give me the full story. It did not absolve him. It did, however, give me a clear fact I could hold. His absence had been an act, not mere abandonment. We walked home under a sky that smelled of wet earth. Maggie walked beside me and put a steady hand on my shoulder more than once. At my kitchen table, I spread the letters again and wrote a brief list of the facts we had. Matching watermark, vendor memory, car sighting, returned page, and his final line. Putting facts on paper kept the story from drifting into the dangerous territory of assumption. I dated the list and pinned it under the lamp. Doing that was an action I could take. Maggie sat down across from me and, after a long pause, said, "Evelyn, you will write again. You will write with the knowledge you now hold. You will fold the paper, not hide it." Her voice had no slogans and no speeches. It had concrete instruction. I nodded, because action is how I answer suffering. The decision to keep writing was not ceremonial. It was a method. I took a fresh sheet, fitted my fountain pen into my fingers where the dent sat, and began to write a short letter addressed to no one. The act steadied a part of me that had been raw with wanting to know. We prepared for a watch the next week. Maggie planned the times and names of people in the village who would pass notes, who would check the lane, and who would call if a car returned. Her network felt like a tangible shield. I cleaned the dirt from the satchel strap and tucked the single page into the inner pocket with the dented pen. The paper was not evidence anymore. It was a decision I could carry. Carrying it was an action that made me less helpless. That night, before I slept, I sat on the kitchen step and ran my thumb along the tear in the page Adrian had left. The paper smelled of tobacco and rain. I pressed my thumb into the smudged ink and felt the indentations of his handwriting. The physical trace made his absence legible in a new way. I set the paper back inside the satchel, shut it, and felt the bag strap settle on my shoulder like a promise I had made to myself. Maggie hugged me in the kitchen doorway and said, "You will keep writing, Evelyn, whether he returns or not." She did not say it as a farewell to hope. She it as an instruction about how to live when answers are partial. I answered with a short sentence. I will keep writing. That sentence was the one I could keep making true. Around midnight I heard a car pass along the lane and pause. I held my breath until it drove on. The engine's fading was the final sound of the chapter. I folded the last unsent letter into its usual crease and slid it into the satchel. I locked the front door and set the lamp on the table. The final event of the chapter is practical and small. Maggie crossed the room and put a hand on my shoulder, then took a key from her pocket and handed it to me. "Keep it by your bed, in case you must leave quick," she said. That action closed the chapter's immediate business. It left the problem resolved for the night and the wider mystery open for tomorrow. I wound the key into my palm and felt the metal's cool edge. The river kept moving beyond my gate. The single page lay folded in my satchel, and I chose to carry it with the dented pen as proof that I would not let silence decide my life again. I yanked the page down and mud splattered across my boots. The hairpin came free with a tiny, metallic scrape, and the paper folded open in my hands. Suspicion knotted my stomach before I read a single line. My thumb found a tear along the margin where a sentence had been ripped out. Someone had returned part of my letters and left them where anyone could see. I did not stand frozen. I sat on the exposed root of the willow and smoothed the paper with both palms until the damp softened. The river smelled of iron and cut grass. I checked my pockets for a handkerchief, then used the edge of my cardigan to blot the darkest smudge. My fingers were shaking in a way that said alarm more than sorrow. Alarm pushed me to look for footprints. Alarm pushed me to read the handwriting that had once been all my answer. The script belonged to one person. I knew the slant, the way his teeth were short, and the loops on the eyes tightened at the bottom. I had folded 1,000 pages like that, pressing lines into neat stacks and hiding them in the satchel Adrian had noticed once and not asked about. The page began mid-sentence and stopped where the tear cut through a name. I read what remained aloud, crude and small. If you keep writing, they will know where I am. That sentence turned into a question in my mouth. Who left a warning in the river, and why return any of my words at all? I had felt longing for years. Longing sat beneath every letter I wrote. Now suspicion overlaid that longing and pushed me into motion. I folded the page, tucked it inside my satchel beside the faded handkerchief, and stood. Maggie was there before I reached the lane. She had a thermos in one hand and the keyring that clacked like a distant bell. "Evelyn," she said, voice low enough that only the willow heard. "You found something." She set the thermos on the bank and crouched, palms on her knees, scanning the ground like she would check an oven for heat. "I found a page," I said. I held the corner out so she could see the tear. Someone pinned it to the willow. My sentence was short because the willow and I were full of things that needed saying in small pieces. Maggie touched the paper and frowned. "This is your handwriting, isn't it?" Her voice flattened with the kind of question that sounds like fact-checking. I nodded. She folded her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked up the lane. "Someone's been watching your route, Maggie, Mrs. Beale. She saw a man in a dark coat near the mill yesterday. Holloway, me, a delivery was made to the wrong name last week." She paused, then added, "You should not go alone, Evelyn." Her mouth set the way it always did when she planned to argue and protect at once. "I won't go alone," I said. And the sentence was a choice as much as a promise. I thought of the postman who had left a plain envelope on my doorstep a few weeks earlier and the way my hands tightened on the waxed flap then. That envelope had delivered the first ache I had not expected to reopen. Now the river had returned a piece and made the H a puzzle. We walked the bank together, boots sucking at the mud. Maggie's thermos steamed mist into the cool air, and she kept glancing at the mill's silhouette, where a broken wheel leaned into a dark window. "Do you want me to tell someone else?" she asked. She always said my name when she was balancing fear and practicality. "Holloway already said he saw someone at the mill," I replied. "Tell him nothing more. I have to see if the rest of the pages are there." The words came out tight. That was another shift. Suspicion had become resolve. The river gave us a scrap that looked like it had been chewed by water. I found the damp, coffee-stained piece under a tuft of reeds and held it up where Maggie could see the ink smear. The handwriting matched. The scrap held part of a sentence that made my mouth dry. "You asked me not to tell her because..." And then a blot where the water had eaten the letters. "Someone removed a line, Maggie. Someone who knows what you wrote." She spoke quickly, each word a small hard stone. I felt a sting at the base of my throat that might have been anger or might have been old grief. I folded the scrap into my palm and said nothing for one full breath. We went toward the mill at dusk. The lane had ruts, and the wheel tracks carried brown water where the road dipped. Maggie talked as we walked, short sentences, sharp observations. "If he left to protect you," she said, "then why leave a page in the river? If Adrian wanted distance, he'd have cut the thread clean." She Adrian's name, and then immediately said my name. Like the two belonged next to each other in a ledger. I told Maggie what I could. The plain envelope on the doorstep that had first loosened something in me, the long stack of unsent letters in the satchel, the dent in the fountain pen I keep. I did not tell her everything I wrote inside the letters themselves. I never let anyone read those lines. Maggie listened with hard eyes and then nodded where the lane narrowed. We reached the mill with the light gone thin and blue. The door had been left ajar. A repaired cuff of old leather was pinned on a post where someone had hung it to dry or to mark a place. I ran a fingertip over the repaired cuff and felt the thread that held the seam together. The thread was new. Someone had mended the coat recently. "Evelyn, Maggie," voice small now. "This is near the place Mrs. Beale named. This is where Mayor Holloway, he saw someone." Her sentences came in two parts, the observation and the warning. We pushed the door open. The interior smelled like dust and wood smoke that had not been stirred for weeks. On a windowsill I saw a faint smear of tobacco ash. I did not like the way the ash lay there, too deliberate, like a note left in dust. There was a small stack of folded pages on a work table, one pile with a paperweight on top. They were tied with twine, folded the same way my letters always were. I set my bag down and the satchel hit the floor with a dull thump that felt louder than it should in a quiet room. Maggie mouthed my name and then moved closer with her eyes open. not touching but listening. A sound came from the shadow by the doorway, a scrape that could have been a foot shifting or metal on wood. A man stepped out and the dusk wrote his silhouette in hard lines. I saw the repaired cuff again, the old leather coat with the small patch of newer thread. He held a folded page between thumb and forefinger. "You brought my pages to the river," I said, because speaking made the space between us something to cross. He did not answer at once. His voice arrived low and measured. I brought one back. Adrian's name felt like a stone in my mouth when I said it. He had a bruise along his temple that cut through the shadow of his hair. He kept his hands where I could see them. Why leave any? I asked, why not burn them? My hands were steady, but my voice failed me on the last word. I had feared this moment and built 1,000 conversations around it. The moment itself cut into pieces quicker than any of them. Adrian set the page on the table and stepped forward so his face showed. Because I could not, he started, and then stopped as if words had become too loud in a place that had no privacy. He looked at Maggie and then at me, because leaving everything burned you, Evelyn. That was the worst thing I could do to you. Maggie put a hand on my shoulder. "Evelyn, he says he wanted to spare you," she said. Her voice had the kind of suspicion that wants proof. She faced Adrian with the practical directness she used for mending a fence. "Adrian, Maggie, why pin a page to the willow where anyone can find it? Why tear a line out and leave the rest?" Her questions hit like small, searching blows. Adrian's jaw jumped. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. He cupped his hand against the table and tapped twice, the same rhythm he taps on wood when thinking. "Someone is reading them and deciding what to return," he said. "I came to see if you were safe. I came to take what needed taking." He used short sentences, each one a controlled beat. "Who is deciding?" "Maggie." Her patience had become urgency. "Who touches your letters without your permission?" "She my name afterward as a way to tether me." Adrian's eyes flicked away. "I do not know all the names," he said, "but I know 2 things. 1. Pages have been removed on purpose. 2. I left because there were obligations I could not bring you into. I thought distance would keep you from harm." Maggie shrugged. "Distance didn't keep him from deciding what you could read." "Evelyn," her sentence was short. It carried accusation and protection both. "I never asked him to decide for me," I said. The line made my chest ache because it forced a small, raw honesty into the room. The decision to leave had been his. The decision to write and wait had been mine. His hand went to his inner pocket and produced a small folded page. He set it on the table so we could all see. The paper matched the one I had found on the willow. The ink bled in the same places. "I kept one back because I thought it might be the right thing to do if you ever needed it," he said. I did not think to come back sooner. There was a pause then, 3 heartbeats long, where the mill held us like a bowl. The pause shifted my fear into something sharper. The sense that I had been made into a problem to be managed rather than a person with agency. "Adrian," I said, and I forced my voice to keep small words. "Why did you leave without telling me?" The question was not gentle. It demanded a reason I had long hoped would make sense. He took a breath that raked his shoulders. "I left because I thought I could carry whatever was necessary to keep you safe," he said. "I thought if I took the risk alone, it would stop touching you." I was wrong. Maggie leaned forward. "Wrong is a small word for leaving someone without a reason, Adrian. You made a choice that changed her life." She my name again, and it sounded like the name of someone she had decided to guard. Adrian's fingers tightened on the paper. "Tell me what you want from me now," he said. "Tell me what I can do to repair what I made worse." His voice lost some of its reserve. A tremor threaded through. That tremor was a kind of confession. I felt anger come up first. It punched at my ribs and left me with a dry mouth. "You can't fix everything with words," I said. "You can't pick and send back my letters and expect the rest to go away." The words tasted like the river mud. I had imagined a confrontation like this 100 times. The imagined version had been polite and clear. This one had edges. The emotion shifted again inside me. Anger melted into an ache of old waiting. I put both palms on the table where the paper lay and looked at Adrian. Why bring one back at all? I asked, why not send all of them or destroy them so no one else could use them? Adrian's eyes moved to the torn margin. Someone took a line that matters to them, he said. Someone who reads the pages and acts on what they learn. I wanted to see if the person handling them would make a mistake. I wanted to know if I could find out who it was. He tapped the table once more. I thought I could do that and come home without touching you. I see now that I only did the second part. Maggie interrupted then, words quick and hard. So you spy and you leave and you expect Evelyn to stand there and say thank you. She spoke 3 short lines in a row. Adrian, you owe her a clearer truth than this. You owe her the names you won't tell. The exchange became a small argument. They went back and forth with clipped sentences, Maggie's bluntness against Adrian's measured responses. I let their voices fill the mill while I kept my hands on the paper. Mr. Holloway arrived during their argument, breath visible in the enter of cold air. He had a bruise on his knuckle that matched the one Adrian had near his temple. I saw a man leave the mill last night, he said. He patted the repaired cuff with a small, careful motion. He had a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He did not want to be seen. His arrival changed the room. Another external fact landed between us like a thrown stone. The bruise on his knuckle and the parcel tied to the mill made the problem more than a personal failing. It made it a network of choices stretching beyond the 3 of us. Who is reading my letters? I demanded, because the question had to be asked out loud. The room needed the sound. Who has the right to decide what reaches me? Adrian rubbed his thumb along the rim of the paper as if trying to set a seam. I do not have all the names, he said. But I kept a page in my coat for reasons I won't let remain secret anymore. I have a small list. I will tell you, but not here. It's not safe here. Maggie scoffed. Not safe where, Adrian? The river, the mill. You left us without saying a word, and now you choose where it's safe. She jabbed the air with her hand and then caught herself. Evelyn, what do you want? She asked me in a whisper that was both fierce and pleading. My answer felt older than the moment. I wanted the names. I wanted the missing line. I wanted a reason that did not make me someone to be hidden. I wanted the rest of the pages back or burned. I wanted an admission that leaving had been an active choice, not a mercy. I walked around the table and picked up my satchel. I opened it and took out a small packet of the unsent letters, the ones I had never meant to send. I set them beside Adrian's page and let the 2 piles sit together. The sight of my handwriting beside his felt like a test. Adrian's face changed. You brought them, he said. He sounded surprised and then afraid in quick succession. Evelyn, you should not. I should, I said, because if someone else thinks they can decide what I read, I need to see who they are. My voice steadied. The emotion that led me here, suspicion, had turned again into a form of action. I would not wait another season to be managed. Maggie set her thermos down, closed her hands around it, and met my eyes. Then we go to my house tonight, she said. We bring lanterns. We tell 2 others where we will be. If someone tries to stop us, Mr. Holloway will have seen the man leaving the mill. He can warn the village. She 3 practical things in quick succession. Her plan was not dramatic. It was a small, defendable map. Adrian did not answer immediately. He watched me like a man watching for a weather change he had caused. If you ask me to come, he said finally, I will come. I will answer where I can. The offer held its own risk. A man admitting presence. I accepted. The choice was not forgiveness yet. It was a step that recognized his presence as part of the problem and possibly part of the solution. We left the mill together. The path back was wetter and the river whispered on the far side. Maggie linked her arm through mine and kept her steps close. Meh. Holloway walked a few paces behind Adrian and us, muttering what might have been a prayer or directions about who to warn if trouble came. Outside, the sky had gone a heavy blue. Fireflies were starting to blink where the hedges met the lane. I felt another emotion move through me, something like resolve and fear braided together. That was an emotion shift. From suspicion to alarm to steadiness edged with dread. When we reached the lane by the farmhouse, Maggie stopped and made me look at her. Evelyn, promise me one thing, she said. Promise you will not hand your letters to anyone without reading the pages they take back first. She my full name and I could hear the warning in the way she placed each syllable. I promise, I said, saying it was a small contract with myself. Adrian hesitated. Then I'll give you my list at dusk tomorrow, he said. You can read the names. If any of those people touch your pages, I will answer for it. I will go with you to speak to them if you want. He used short sentences of commitment. The steadiness in his voice had the taste of a man bargaining for a chance to do right. I put the returned page in my satchel by the pen and the handkerchief. The paper was still damp enough that the ink smelled faintly of river and smoke. I folded it carefully, not to hide it, but to keep it close enough to know it existed. On the lane, Maggie walked me to my gate and would not leave until she had set the chain in place with 2 hands. "I'll sit with you while you decide what to do next," she said. "Adrian can go. He needs to make whatever choices he must. You need to rest. You need to read the torn line again when you are not pressed by him." She spoke quickly and then softened. "Evelyn, you do not owe him silence for his choices." I nodded and walked inside. My kitchen smelled of boiled cabbage and bread. I put the thermos on the table and poured a cup. The cup was small and practical. I smoothed the returned page on the table and read the remaining words aloud once more, the sound of my own voice filling the room. Outside, someone knocked, 3 quick, distinct raps on the cottage door. My hand touched the satchel where the page rested. The knock was precise, the sort of knock that arrives when the person at the door expects either an answer or a confrontation. I set the cup down and went to the door. Melanie's knock had the cadence that could mean either a neighbor stopping by or someone with news. I paused with my hand on the latch because the chapter had to end on a thing I could hold. The returned page, Adrian's promise, Maggie's plan, and a knock that implied someone else had a message. I opened the door to find Holloway standing on the step with his cap in hand. He looked older in the lamplight. "Evelyn," he said, and for once his voice lacked the small jokes he usually kept. "I thought you should see this." He held out a scrap of paper that was clean at the edges and folded into thirds. The scrap was not one of mine. It bore a name that I did not expect and a time when someone said they would meet a courier by the mill. My fingers closed around the scrap before I let my voice answer. The scrap changed everything because it gave a place and a time to follow, a small map that could lead to answers or danger. I looked at Maggie's thermos on the table, at the satchel with the returned page, and at Adrian's empty apology left in the mill's shadow. I stepped back inside, shutting the door with one careful motion. The kitchen light made a small circle on the floor. I set the scrap beside the returned page and then sat. The decision waited between 2 breaths, to follow the scrap's instruction tomorrow at dusk with Maggie and Holloway, or to let the returned words remain a mystery. The choice would be made in the morning, but the chapter closed on the sound of the clock over the stove ticking once, steady and precise, like a heart measuring a resolve. The knock came 3 times, hard enough to make the latch jump. I opened the gate with the lantern in one hand and my satchel slung across my shoulder. Suspicion tightened my palms the moment I saw him. Adrian stood under the porch light, coat wet, a single damp page folded and pinned to his boot with mud. He did not smile. He set the ruined paper on my threshold and said, without meeting my eyes, "I didn't mean for it to come back like this." The problem was plain in that sentence. He had left, he had kept something, and someone had returned part of what he hid. I pulled the door wider and let the lane smell of wet straw inside. And I kept my voice small because the knock had woken the neighbors and because my hands would not stop tracing the edge of the envelope. "Adrian," I said, "why are you here now?" My mouth wanted the word abandonment to land. My chest held a thin, steady suspicion that he had come to close a ledger and leave me with the bill. He looked at the paper on the floor, at the damp smear along its edge, then at me. "I couldn't let it stay where it was," he said. "Not after what I found out." He kept his hands clasped the way he always did when he tried to hold something messy inside. The lane was quiet except for the rain running off the eaves and the distant low of a cow. I stepped back so he could come up the path. Maggie's kitchen light bloomed across the lane. She was standing in the doorway with a lantern and the shawl over her shoulders like a small island of warmth. I hadn't planned to drag anyone into this, but the presence of another witness felt like a shield and a risk all at once. I felt suspicion and a fierce, aching longing both at once. The longing made me reach for facts. The suspicion kept me from trusting his between words. "Maggie," I said, "you shouldn't be up." She smiled the way people do when they are already on a side. "Evelyn," she answered, loud enough for Adrian to hear, "stay outside." "Tell me what you brought here, Adrian." She set the lantern on the step and folded her hands so the light hit the lines in her face. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it, and then set a damp thumb to the page and pointed at the ragged margin where a sentence had been torn away. "I kept this," he said. "I kept the one thing you thought you had lost." I thought. He stopped. He looked down as if the words were heavy. "You thought." I echoed. My voice went short. "You thought you'd explain later. You thought you could decide for me." The accusation was quick, sharp. I had rehearsed neither fury nor forgiveness. Anger arrived as a tool because I needed movement. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Evelyn, listen." He glanced at Maggie. "Maggie, you know me. I left because I had no choice. I didn't want you dragged in." His answers were small measures of truth. The lane air tasted of iron and the coal smoke from Maggie's stove. Maggie's voice came out like a hinge swung open. "Adrian Corvo, you left her a year and a half ago with a trunk of questions. You owe Evelyn more than a damp scrap on the doorstep." She stepped forward and the lantern light drew the wet off her shawl in quick flashes. "What are you hiding?" Adrian folded his hands, his fingers finding the rhythm he used when he was thinking. He did not look at me. "There were debts," he said. "People who kept records in numbers and names. I thought if I took what they asked for, I'd keep you safe. I took the wrong ledger to balance the account." His voice dropped. "I left to buy you time. I left to carry the consequence myself." That is the moment the emotion inside me shifted from suspicion toward a new shape. Anger softened into confusion, then into a cold, practical fear. Fear for what those ledgers meant, fear for the people who still watched. Maggie scoffed. "And the letters?" she demanded. "Why are my neighbor's letters in this mess?" Adrian's hand dipped into his inner pocket and came out with another folded page, one he had kept pressed and dry. He offered it like a confession. I took it with fingers that trembled but did not break. The handwriting was mine. The ink had been smudged and then carefully retraced in places. A line had been torn away from the margin, leaving a ragged edge that aligned with the hole in the page on my doorstep. I read aloud, because the text on the page was a map of everything I'd done since he left. You'll come if it ever gets dire. You wrote that you would find me." My voice did not crack. Someone ripped out a sentence. Someone removed the place name where I left letters by the bridge. Someone wanted the trail cold. The sentence hung between us. An external event arrived without warning. A woman across the lane opened her shutters and whispered the word, "Constable." A young constable stepped into the lamplight, cheeks pink from the rain, a folded scrap of paper in his hand. He laid it on the gate as if it were part of the night's mail and did not meet my eyes. "Miss Hart," he said. "Too formal for the street. You should stop asking questions about those letters." He pushed a single black sentence across the wood so we could all read it. "Stop digging." The constable's mouth was set. He shuffled his boots. The warning landed like a stone in the lane. Adrian's fingers closed on the page in my hand and his whole posture snapped into something taut. "They still watch," he said. "That's why I left. I thought distance would be enough." My fear hardened into anger. "They? Who are they?" "Who the constable to deliver threats?" The constable wouldn't answer beyond clearing his throat and staring at the lantern. We argued under the street lamp. The argument ran quick and sharp. "Adrian, you left me with unanswered letters and a closed door." I said. "You didn't give me a reason to wait, Evelyn." "I left because I thought you would be safer alone," Adrian replied. "Safer alone." Maggie cut in. "You think you keep her safe by vanishing." "I thought I could hold it for both of you, Adrian. I was wrong. You were gone for 18 months. "Adrian," I said. "The letters I wrote." "Someone stole the place names. Someone wanted them gone. Why didn't you tell me that?" He looked at Maggie then. "Because names get traced back. Because the ledger had addresses. Because if I stayed, they'd take you as leverage. I thought that by leaving I'd keep them from finding you." Maggie spat out a laugh that had no humor in it. "Do you understand how that sounds? He left a woman who wrote to him every year and hid the very pages she used to mark places. He thinks absence equals protection. Providence doesn't write ledgers, Adrian." "People do." I felt the conversation peel back the old hurt until it stung raw. My hands folded the page again and again. Each fold became a small ritual. "Then, Adrian, very quietly, there's one place they didn't watch. The river." The words arrived like a key turning. My mind moved to the river where I had left letters in paper wrapped in oilcloth. That was the map I'd used when I had nowhere else to put my waiting. The constable's jaw tightened. He stepped closer and shoved the scrap at my feet. "You should not go to the river tonight," he warned. "Someone will be there." His warning was clear and concrete, not a blur. My body reacted to it. My stomach dropped, my fingers clenched. And for one sharp second I thought of all the nights I had walked alone to the bank with a candle and a stack of folded pages. I stared down at the torn edge of the page Adrian had kept. The missing sentence had been the only clue. I could burn the letters. I could hand them to Maggie and never look back. Instead I said, "We go now." The language was simple, and it forced the next action into being. Maggie squared her shoulders and passed the lantern to me. Adrian made a sound I had never heard from him before, an almost inaudible surrender, and shrugged his coat tighter. We moved along the lane, the three of us, each step pressing us into a decision. The rain sliced at our collars, and our boots left prints in the mud. I walked ahead with the lantern because habit had trained me to lead when I was frightened. Maggie kept close on my left. Adrian walked on the right and kept his hands in his pockets like someone holding a tool he might need. On the path toward the river, I felt an emotion shift again. Suspicion bloomed into a quiet dread as the world rearranged itself around the idea of danger. Every rustle of reeds sounded like movement. A car's headlights passed in the far distance and then vanished. We saw no one until the bridge, and at the bridge a smell reached me, old rope, diesel, and the cloy of someone who smoked cheap tobacco. And then headlights slashed the dark. Two men stepped from a parked car and approached the bank with slow, measured steps. They came with questions on their faces and hands ready near pockets. One of them spoke before he reached the water. "Quite late for a walk, Miss Hart," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The other man reached for the bundle half buried in the reeds. "What are you doing with our paper?" he asked. The words were direct. The problem became violent possibility. Adrian moved first. He stepped between me and the man and put himself along the line where someone might charge. "Those letters are hers," he said. "Back off." His tone was a flat command that did not invite bargaining. The man smirked and reached. One quick motion and a hand closed around my satchel. I yanked back. The man swore and shoved. Maggie moved forward with a kitchen knife in her hand. She had taken it from her shawl pocket as she left the house. "Take a step back," she told them. "You touch her and I'll slice the next thing that moves." Her voice was steady. The blade flashed in the lantern light. The first man laughed and said, "You don't know who we are, old woman." He stepped closer. His partner tried again for the papers. Adrian's hand caught the reach and twisted. There was a rustle and the man's shoulder hit the ground hard. He swore and spat. My body reacted with a physical clarity. My knees went weak, my hands flew to my mouth, and then I stepped forward because standing still felt like letting the world do the deciding. "Adrian," I said, and my voice was a small, sharp thing. "Tell me now. Who are they?" The confrontation became interrogation. He answered between tight breaths. "They're religious people, collectors who keep names and locations. They work with men who think paper is a weapon. I thought I could pay them off. I thought I could buy your safety." I failed. He pushed the man off his foot and stood over him with his hands trembling. The second man tried to rise, and then the constable's whistle cut the night. Another car's lights rounded the bend, and the two strangers paused like animals that smelled a stronger scent. The constable had returned, and with him came three other villagers drawn by the disturbance. The men looked at the numbers and then at our faces. The smaller one hissed, "We can leave. This isn't worth the trouble." They backed toward their car and drove off with tires cutting through puddles. After they left, my limbs shook in a way that felt like a small, distant earthquake. Maggie grabbed my elbow and led me up the path toward her house. "Come in," she said. "Sit." We looked at the page. Inside, the kitchen was warm and smelled of tea and burnt sugar. Maggie set a pot on and took a strip of cloth to dab the smudge on the margin. She sat me and Adrian at the table like a midwife arranging a delivery. Adrian folded his hands and finally opened the whole page. He smoothed it gently as if the paper itself might speak. "I want to tell you everything," he said. "I will not speak in riddles anymore." I watched the way his fingers trembled. The physical detail showed more than any long speech. There was a man, Luciano, who kept records for the ledger people. He demanded names and addresses in exchange for silence. I tried to pay him, and when that failed he asked for a guarantee. He wanted evidence that you wouldn't talk. He wanted proof you'd be moved, removed, whatever that meant. I couldn't let that happen to you, so I left, and I kept the letters I found to hide where you had hidden them. I thought hiding the place would stop anyone who wanted to connect the dots. He stopped and rubbed his thumb over the paper's edge. Maggie O'Brien, did you ever think to tell Evelyn? Did you think she would not want to help herself? He looked at me. I thought leaving was the lesser evil, he said. I thought the ledger would take me first. I didn't know they'd start tearing pages. His voice broke once and he swallowed. I folded the page and felt the motion settle me. The tears rose without warning, no abstract phrase, only the salt and humidity on my cheeks. I told myself to be precise. You did something to protect me, and you took away my chance to decide what I could have endured. That's not protection. That's choice stolen. My words were firm, a practical judgment. O'Brien flinched. We argued again, shorter this time, and then Maggie set a pot of tea between us and made us drink. The interplay of conversation and care was a kind of stitching. Maggie looped in facts I had not had, records of a man asking questions in the market, a payment intercepted, a name Luciano mentioned in passing at the pub. She had a ledger of her own, a yellowed scrap where she kept the house numbers of the village like talismans. By the time dawn eased into the sky, the immediate danger had retreated and O'Brien had offered a fuller explanation. He of taking a wrong ledger off a man's desk in a hotel room and of burning a folder that had contained place names. He of nights spent in cheap rooms with a page he couldn't throw away. The confession reframed his leaving. It showed sacrifice but also a misjudged secrecy. The emotional shift was clear. Blame gave way to a small, brittle understanding. Anger melted into a cautious willingness to listen. Maggie rose and walked to the larder for plates. She pressed a hand to Adrian's shoulder in a way that suggested acceptance but not forgiveness. You can help her now. Or you can go back to being the man who left, she said. Which will it be? Adrian looked at me with a steadiness that surprised me. I will help, he said, if you will let me. I will stand by you while we find what else was taken. He did not ask for mercy. He asked for a practical partnership. That request, offered in plain language, felt like the first true proposal of the night. After breakfast we walked back to the river, not to fight but to recover what had been stolen. The light was thin and grey, and my boots sank into the bank where I had last left a bundle. I dug with my fingers and found several envelopes wrapped in oilcloth. The paper was damp at the edges, but the ink inside had held. I thumbed through the letters and felt the slow, steady loosening in my chest that comes from finding a missing thing where you had left it. Then I kept one page back, the returned page Adrian had brought, and I folded it next to my heart. I thought of throwing every other paper into the current as a cleansing, but I held them instead, and I chose to let some go. I slit open an envelope and watched the river take fluttering edges, not in a metaphor but in a specific movement, a postage stamp peeling off, a smudge of ink sinking. Each thrown envelope was a decision made with my hands. Maggie watched, and then Adrian did something he had not done in months. He crouched and picked up the one page I had kept and smoothed it, as if trying to make it whole. He looked at the ragged edge and then at me. I did not tell you because I was afraid of what they would do if they saw how much you meant to me, he said. I was afraid they'd hurt you to get to me. The confession was raw but direct. I answered with a small, practical action. I set my hand on his forearm for a single moment and withdrew it quickly, testing boundaries. We carried the remaining letters back to Maggie's kitchen and set them on her table. She labeled them and sealed some in a tin box. We will make copies and hide them in 3 places, she said, not because secrets are good, but because records can be weapons. If someone else wants to use paper as a tool, we will use paper as a shield. Her plan was ordinary, tactical. It made worry into work and thereby made fear less like a fog and more like a list of things to do. Adrian helped me tie a faded handkerchief around the tin. His hands were careful and competent in a way that had nothing theatrical about it. He tied the knot and then said, I'll stay until Luciano thinks he's wiped the slate clean. Then I'll go turn myself in if I must. But I won't leave you in the dark again. The offer was specific and unromantic. It was a promise with terms. In the end, I walked alone to the river before the sun rose. I kept one letter folded in my hand and slid a handful into the water. The papers drifted like small white birds and then sank when the current caught them. I felt a release in my fingers, a concrete letting go rather than a proclamation. I kept the returned page in my satchel and tucked it against my chest. When I stood up, Maggie called from the lane, "Evelyn, come see." She pointed to the path where a man I recognized from the market had left a bundle of envelopes by the fence post, as if he'd found a way to return other people's words. The twist was specific. Someone else had been cleaning house, too, leaving back what they'd taken or leaving proof of their involvement. That shift changed what we thought we knew. It suggested not all the loss had been deliberate theft. Some of it had been a messy, reversible quarrel over ownership. I walked back to the cottage with the returned page heavy against my ribs. Adrian followed at a distance. We had changed the night into a list of actions: search, confrontation, protection, rather than only a spool of grief. The final paragraph of the night is a concrete beat. The constable knocked again at my gate, this time to hand me a stamped envelope with a printed city return address and no sender. Inside was a single line of handwriting that read, "We watched, we learned, you are quieter now." That sentence was small, specific, and it was an event that demanded a response. I folded the envelope and put it in the tin with the other letters. I locked the gate. I put the lantern in the window. The night had given me an explanation, a wound, and a plan, and it had taken from me an illusion of safety I did not know I still held. My choice was to keep the returned page and the memory of his hands smoothing it, to accept Adrian's willingness to help, and to let Maggie hold the map of our next steps. The physical rhythm of locking the gate closed the chapter, a real, audible click that was both an end and a promise to act when the next knock came. Emotion root. Suspicion informed my first actions and my refusal to accept a tidy story. It moved through anger, fear, and practical resolve as events unfolded. By the time morning light came, the immediate danger had eased and the decisions lay plain. We would hide copies, we would seek who had torn the page, and we would not make absence a weapon again. The last sound of the night was the gate closing behind me and Maggie's kettle beginning to boil, an exact, domestic noise that tethered the rest of us to work ahead.